Tonight, soaring to new heights. Inflation explodes to 9.1%. The cosmic prices in the economy, the highest in 4 decades. Plus, the president's trip to Israel.
Connection between the Israeli people and the American people is bone deep.
Tensions rising in the Middle East over Iran's nuclear ambitions, even as Israel works to normalize ties with the Arab world. And post-Roe world.
Roe versus Wade was premised on egregious legal errors.
This is about our right to self-determination.
Lawmakers grapple over the abortion debate in the wake of the Supreme Court ruling overturning Roe v. Wade. All this and more on Faith Nation. A new economic low of high prices. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm Tara Mergener. So when will it end? That is what American households are wondering as prices go up and up. Tonight, another inflation report shows prices surging across the board to an astonishing 9.1%, the highest in 40 years. Our CBN News correspondent Brody Carter is taking a closer look at these numbers. Brody, when will inflation finally hit its peak?
Well, Tara, the current numbers out from today's report show few signs of any relief regarding surging prices. One economist tells us that likely we're headed towards a recession, while the White House says the data released today is likely out of date.
We don't want it to get any higher because, like me, we can't afford it.
June's inflation report shows prices went up 9.1% higher compared to a year ago. That's the highest inflation rate increase since December of 1981.
We expect the headline number, which includes gas and food, to be highly elevated, mainly because gas prices were so elevated in June.
In a year, the price of oil has almost doubled, pushing gas prices up nearly 60%. Households are paying roughly 20% more to keep the lights and gas on, and the cost of going out to eat rose 12.2%. However, the White House is calling this month's report backward-looking data, pointing to a recent drop in the national average for a gallon of gas, still blaming the war in Ukraine for surging gas and food prices.
June CPI data is already out of date because energy prices have come down substantially this month and are expected to fall further. The average retail price of gas was 11% higher in June than it was in May. And the cost of gas in July is already down 7% from the June peak.
The White House releasing this statement saying the data does not reflect the full impact of nearly 30 days of decreases in gas prices. It goes on to say those savings are providing important breathing room for American families. Meanwhile, at the pump,
gasoline is just too crazy. It could literally crippled our country, especially after COVID. Nobody has money for anything, and now everything goes up higher and higher.
The report will likely keep the Federal Reserve on track to raise interest rates by 0.75% at its meeting later this month, hopeful to cool inflation. But analysts watching the markets worry raising rates too high too fast will likely push our economy into a recession.
I think now the fact that the Fed has to be more aggressive in combating it means that the likelihood of recession is probably increased.
Tough day on Wall Street as well. Today's stock slumped shortly after the release of today's inflation report. The Dow Jones dropped 300 points within the first half hour. S&P 500 doing equally as terrible, roughly less than dropping rather and losing 0.25%. But then they finally did rally back shortly, only to drop all their earnings once again today. The Dow is down above 200 points. The S&P 500 almost 0.5 percentage point. Tara, back to you.
All right, Brody, thank you. Here with us now is E.J. Antoni, Research Fellow in the Center for Data Analysis at the Heritage Foundation. E.J., thanks for joining us tonight on Faith Nation. You've seen the numbers, obviously. Are we heading for an economic recession? Or the million-dollar question, are we in one already?
Well, Tara, thank you for having me. And I think we are already in a recession. We've already had 1 quarter of negative economic growth. this quarter, or excuse me, last quarter, the second quarter of this year is most likely going to turn negative as well. So yes, we are most likely already in a recession. And this idea that the Federal Reserve needs to ease up on interest rate hikes in order to avoid that recession is just nonsense. Inflation is going to cause a recession anyway. We might as well get it over with and bring prices down in the process.
I'm sure a lot of people would agree with that. You know, we are seeing a very recent decline in gas prices that have not been reflected yet in the latest inflation report. Is it possible there is a lag in this report and that we've actually hit the peak?
Well, there is some lag, but apparently no one at the White House actually knows how these reports are calculated, because the Bureau of Labor Statistics, what they do is 3 times during the month, once in the beginning, once in the middle, and once at the end, will conduct surveys to gather the data that goes into these numbers. So the last of those 3 surveys actually does capture some of the decrease in gasoline, although certainly not all of it. But whether or not that's the case, it still does not erase the fact that there are tremendous costs that businesses have been bearing that have not yet been passed on to consumers, but will be in the coming months. So this is far from over.
Yeah, and we've mentioned interest rates. How likely is this report to actually keep the feds on track to raise the interest rates? And it sounds like you don't actually think the rate hikes are working.
Well, it's not so much that they're not working, but the Federal Reserve waited far too long and has taken far too small of steps in terms of dealing with this inflation. The time to raise rates was over a year ago, when they had the first indications that inflation was becoming a problem. Instead, they dawdled and spent time worrying about things like climate change and diversity and other left-wing talking points that they have no business getting involved in.
And finally, what should Americans be doing? We're all asking ourselves this to confront these high prices. What can we do?
Well, unfortunately, because inflation is a tax, a hidden tax, but still a tax, there really is nothing you can do to completely protect yourself from it. The only thing that you can do to truly protect yourself from inflation would be to remove the policies that are causing it. And that is going to require change in the federal government.
All right, a hard road ahead. EJ, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Tara, thank you for having me.
All right. Well, President Biden kicked off his 4-day Middle East tour in Israel today, his first visit to the country as president. This as Biden's trip comes at a precarious time in the Middle East, marked by a rapidly shifting political landscape in Israel, new regional alliances, and the possibility of conflict as well. For more on the president's Middle East tour, we are joined by our White House correspondent, Abigail Robertson.
Well, Tara, speaking in front of Israel's prime minister and president today, President Biden emphasized his long-standing relationships with Israeli leaders and continued support for the country.
Greater peace, greater stability, greater connection. It's critical. It's critical, if I might add, for all the people of the region, which is why we'll discuss my continued support, even though I know it's not in the near term, a 2-state solution. That remains, in my view, the best way to ensure the future of equal measure of freedom, prosperity, and democracy for Israelis and Palestinians alike. We're united in our...
President Biden also received a briefing on Israel's Iron Dome defense system and paid a visit to the Holocaust Memorial.
All right, Abby, President Biden's also going to be making a controversial stop in Saudi Arabia during this trip after pledging on the campaign trail to make the kingdom a global pariah for its human rights abuses. What can you tell us about that?
Well, Tara, this is certainly going to be the most closely watched leg of President Biden's trip in the Middle East. But President Biden wants to present Saudi Arabia as a strategic partner in the Middle East, since both countries see Iran as a growing threat, and they believe that Iran is closer than ever to obtaining a nuclear weapon. And Biden also hopes to secure a pledge from Saudi Arabia to release more oil in hopes that would help bring U.S. gas prices down, although it's unclear if he's going to get that pledge from them and how much it would actually help us here at home. Tara?
All right, Abigail Robinson at the White House, thank you so much. Well, coming up, the abortion debate heats up on the Hill. Lawmakers in the House grill witnesses on both sides of one of the most divisive issues in America. More hearings today on the impact of a post-Roe America. The House Oversight Committee calling on state officials, abortion advocates, and legal experts to examine the effects of new abortion restrictions in nearly half the country now. This is lawmakers' battle over what action needs to be taken at the federal level. CBN News correspondent Caitlin Burke covered today's hearing. Caitlin, a lot of strong opinions over this issue, obviously.
Tara, party lines were clearly drawn during today's hearing. Republicans defending an unborn baby's right to life and applauding the high court's decision to return the issue of abortion back to the states, while Democrats vowed to continue fighting for the rights of women and calling the impact of the Dobbs decision catastrophic.
They don't appear to have much voice in the Republican caucus today, but there are lots of Republicans who agree with us that this is a choice that belongs to women, girls, and their families.
Their whole focus is on intimidating the court, and they're the ones with the radical position. Mr. Raskin just said we're radical. They're the ones who think you should take the life of an unborn child. You could take the life of an unborn child right up until their birthday.
As lawmakers volleyed back and forth, witnesses spoke of their fears moving forward in a post-Roe America.
And it's opening up a range of unprecedented legal issues that I never thought we would be dealing with. Whether or not you can travel and leave your state, whether or not you can be surveilled, whether or not you as an individual are truly free in this country.
It is essentially a death sentence, given the data that we already know, that a woman is 14 times more likely to die by carrying a pregnancy to term than having an abortion.
Erin Hawley, an attorney at Alliance Defending Freedom and the sole pro-life witness, said her view of a post-Roe America is a hopeful one.
We're already seeing state and private entities like the embattled pregnancy care centers step up to surround expecting moms with a caring community.
She sought to set the record straight on the intentions behind the law that set precedent for 50 years.
The truth is that Roe was not the pro-woman opinion that some imagine. In a patriarchal passage that the pro-abortion left would rather forget, Roe gave to a woman's doctor the ability to choose an abortion.
Witnesses also debating whether or not abortion should be considered health care.
Abortion absolutely is health care. When you have a miscarriage or an ectopic pregnancies, a lot of times abortion is the way that these things are resolved.
So I think there's a few things on which we need to set the record straight. One, that an ectopic pregnancy, treatment for that condition never involves an abortion. The same is true of a miscarriage. An abortion is a situation in which a child, as the Supreme Court explained in Dobbs, is purposely put to death.
Pro-life and abortion rights advocates alike are calling for lawmakers to pass legislation from the federal level. Republicans considering some sort of a nationwide ban as Democrats seek to preserve access to abortions. Neither is likely to pass ahead of midterms when voters will get to weigh in. Tara?
Caitlin, thank you. Well, joining us now is Tony Perkins, president of Family Research Council. Tony, thanks for coming on Faith Nation tonight. In the hearing today in the House, it displayed yet again just how far apart the two sides of this issue are. You heard it in Caitlin's piece. Is abortion considered health care when it comes to dealing with an ectopic pregnancy or a miscarriage?
No, it is not. One of the rules in terms of dealing with a pregnant woman, she is the first patient. And so in saving, when you often hear about saving the life of a mother, that's always the first priority of a doctor, is to save the life of the mother. And if in the treatment of that mother, the baby expires, that's not an abortion. You're not intentionally trying to terminate the life of that child. So there's a lot of myths out there. But I think one of the things we see very clearly, you just saw in that package, is the contrast between the two sides has never been clearer. You've got one celebrating really the right of a woman to end the life of a child, and you have another group that are celebrating the ability to help a woman bring a life to term and walk with her through that process. I mean, you could not have a clear contrast between the two ideologies.
And Tony, Democrats want to codify abortion rights into federal law. Do you see any chance of that happening in the wake of the Supreme Court decision in Roe v. Wade?
Well, they're going to try it again. I mean, we're going to have those votes in the House again this week. They voted on it multiple times before. I mean, you have a couple of Democratic senators. You have Joe Manchin, who has said, no, I'm not going. That's too far. If the pressure were too immense on him and he were to capitulate to the abortion crowd, it could happen in the Senate. So I certainly pray that it does not. And every American who loves life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness needs to be praying that the Senate does not capitulate to that and does not pass a measure codifying Roe v. Wade. Now, that's also very interesting that it dispels this idea that for the last 49 years, this has been the law of the land. It was the court imposing that. What we have now is the ability for people to decide this through their elected representatives, the way it should have been and the way it was 50 years ago.
And this might be a long shot, but is there any legislative space for compromise that would involve Republicans joining with Democrats to provide more maternal health care, daycare, and other necessary options for pregnant women?
That's a really, really good question. I think there is. I mean, you take Washington, D.C., right where we're at now, is that you have this high rate of mortality for pregnant women. And it's not because they don't have access to abortion, which some claim you have to have abortion in order to save the lives of mothers and make their health care better. It's the access to prenatal care. It's the access to basic services. And so, yes, I do think there is a way to find middle ground, and we're going to have to. We're going to have to work because this is a problem, a challenge, I should say, now facing the nation. And we need to work together to provide better outcomes for mothers and their children.
And Tony, real quickly, in terms of the elections, is this abortion issue really a galvanizing feature for Democrats? They're hoping so, but is it really enough to give them an edge?
I don't think so. I think it's for a small minority, yes, it is a driving issue. But I don't think most Americans are driven to the polls because they want to see unborn children taken out. I think right now, when you look at the polls, it's inflation. It's all the things that this administration is not doing. It's rising gas prices. The president says, this is my top focus. My top priority is dealing with inflation. But yet his policies are trying to advance chemical abortions and transgenderism. I think the Democratic Party has a lot bigger problems than the fact that there are those who want to save unborn children.
Midterms will be here before we know it. Tony, thanks so much.
Good to be with you.
All right, with inflation hitting unprecedented record levels, more Americans are looking for extra income. The rise of the side hustle when we come back. Well, we know it's painful as inflation continues to skyrocket, impacting everything from housing to utilities to food and gas. 41% of Americans now need a side job just to meet monthly expenses, and more than 1/3 of Americans are working extra hours to offset the soaring prices. Charlene Aaron has more.
Before prices at the pump and supermarket started taking off, economists noticed a growing number of Americans putting money toward credit card debt or building their savings. Now, according to a new survey by Bankrate, 41% of Americans need a side income just to help pay for monthly expenses, from housing to utilities to food.
When prices started going up and inflation started happening, I really had to take a step back, and I realized I actually wasn't going to be able to finish the semester out.
Halfway through her senior year, 23-year-old Shayna Bourne felt the need to drop out of college due to her tight budget. After becoming a full-time nanny, Shayna soon realized she would need more to make ends meet. That forced her to turn a hobby into a second job.
I had a camera. It was kind of just a hobby, and I would, go out with friends and shoot, or if I went on vacation. But I realized that was a skill set that I did have and equipment I had. And so the Lord's blessed me with great clients, and I've been able to utilize that as a source of a second income.
As the cost of living continued to go up, Shayna then picked up a third job.
The extra money is going towards my immediate bills. I've gone through my finances over and over and over, and it's like there's just a little extra needed in each place, whether it's gas or groceries even. Rent has actually taken an uptick in the last few months.
Shayna is not alone. Inflation is driving more than 1/3 of Americans to increase working hours due to rising prices. Bankrate's Ted Rossman says that any additional income is often going toward putting food on the table or paying rent.
Fewer people are using this money for discretionary expenses. Fewer people are boosting their savings. Not that many people are paying down debt. It's primarily a day-to-day expenses kind of story.
Shayna says that describes many she knows.
I think everyone's kind of struggling right now. I think everyone's looking for ways to make ends meet. It would be a stretch for me to try to think of a friend or family member who's not trying to get additional income.
Rossman says that underscores the financial burden many are carrying.
It's just too bad because I would hope that if you're doing that, you're getting ahead. Maybe the prize at the end of the rainbow is a vacation, or that you're going to knock out your credit card debt, or that you're going to boost your retirement fund. It's tough when you're doing this extra stuff just to kind of stay on that treadmill.
Meanwhile, Shayna tries to keep her college degree hope alive as she continues to do what she can now just to stay afloat.
I'm trying to build that income for whatever is to come, but I'm not sure how long I'll be doing this.
Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
Still ahead, a novice pilot sticks an incredible landing on a makeshift landing strip. More on this next. A new survey shows fewer Americans believe the Bible is the literal word of God. According to a recent Gallup poll, 20% of U.S. adults believe the Bible is the actual word of God. That is down from 24% 5 years ago. 49% of adults believe the Bible is the inspired word of God. Those numbers a little better among professing Christians. 25% say they believe the Bible is literally true, while 58% say it's the inspired word of God. Well, finally tonight, a joyride turned into a harrowing experience for a newly minted pilot. Vincent Frazier received his pilot's license in October and took his father-in-law for a joyride over 4th of July weekend. But when his engine failed over North Carolina, Frazier had no choice but to make an emergency landing. With less than 100 hours of flying time, the Marine Corps veteran expertly dodged mountains and power lines, touching down between cars on the highway and coming to a complete stop. Get this, right in front of a stop sign. After stepping out of the plane, the now flight attendant initially said his hopes of becoming a commercial pilot were gone, but with the support and encouragement of his family, Frazier got his passion back and the confidence to keep flying. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this edition of Faith Nation. We will see you tomorrow.